art can mean different things to different people. For me, it's all about the joy of creating. So if you draw, paint, write, dance, sing, craft, play air guitar, or even sculpt using nothing but mashed potatoes, consider yourself an artist and join the conversation. For the next half hour, meet the artist, learn about their inspiration, and enjoy the beauty of creativity. Welcome to Art Talk with John Cole Artist. Good evening, everyone. This is John Cole Artist, here for your pleasure. Before we get started tonight, I've got a wonderful guest tonight, by the way, and I am so thrilled to be talking to her. But before that, of course, we have the REM pod, because one of these days, Laura, we're going to get lucky, and this thing's going to go off. And of course, if it happens, we're going to have to stop immediately and figure out exactly what's going on.
I would be honored if it happened during my episode. That would be very cool.
That would be awesome. I'd like to introduce everybody to Laura Lindsey. She is a writer, she is a book editor, and she is a creative coach. Laura, thank you so much for being on the show with me tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I was wondering if you could tell the folks a little bit about you, just to get us going. That would be great.
Yes, I would love to. So I am, as John said, a writer, a book editor. I stepped into a new career path about 2 years ago and decided to finally use the degree that I am still paying for. So I'm loving it so far. And outside of that, I'm a mom, which is my greatest joy in life. I have a 5-year-old boy, and hopefully he can watch this one day when he understands what's going on. And I love to run. I love to write when I have the time for it. I love my dogs. I'm a big dog person. I have a 4-month-old puppy downstairs taking a nap right now. And yeah, that's pretty much the gist of me. I'm just really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. I did earlier. I just popped this up. Christine's watching. She says, hello, beautiful soul.
Hi, Christine. Hi, Donna.
And of course, somebody named Allison Roberts. I'm so excited for this. You happen to know that person?
Hi, Mom. Love you.
And of course, Donna. Tell it all, girl. Dig.
Oh, I will. I will. That's what I always tell my writers. Dig deeper. So I'm going to dig.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really wanted to have you on the show because, I dabble in the writing world a little bit.
Yeah.
I've written a couple things, right? And, this is, I call this art talk. And to me, writing is an art form.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that probably is applicable whether or not you're writing fiction or nonfiction, right?
I agree.
Because there's a lot to it. Your major was in English, you said?
Yes, with a focus on creative literature. So.
Oh, that's even better, right? So from that perspective, I mean, writing is probably one of, it's way up there with some of the most influential types of things that people can do.
Yeah.
I think you walk in any Barnes and Noble, you can walk into Walmart, you can walk into Target, pretty much any store, you're going to see books on the shelf. Some are good, some are not good. But I think at the root of it all, there's a story.
1000%.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because, in my opinion, everybody has a story.
Yes, right? I agree.
And I also know that most people don't talk about their stories.
Unfortunately, that is also something I agree with. So writing is really fascinating to me. I've always had an interest in it. I loved reading as a little girl. At the book fair when, it would happen at school, I'd be so excited to get new books. And really in school, I used reading as an escape for a lot of things. So writing is the oldest form of spreading ideas and influence around the world. The printing press is probably, if you want to talk about something happening overnight to change the world forever, the printing press is one of those things. Yeah. Everyone does have a story. And really until the printing press was invented, there wasn't really a way other than word of mouth to influence or get your ideas or your story out there. And I think the importance behind a story for everybody is to relate to other people, to find a community, to find support, and maybe even to change somebody's life with what you write. That's to me, the penultimate goal is to change somebody's life with your words. So I encourage anybody that I work with. A lot of people think that they don't have anything to say, or, oh, I've heard that story before, or I read that book about this thing and it was all said. And the thing is, whatever was written about it was not in your words. And I think it's, it's something that people underestimate, the power of their own story. And even if you can just relate to one person or let them feel like they're not alone, it's incredibly impactful. So whether it's through podcasting, YouTubing, making really any kind of content visually or whatever. Obviously I prefer books. That's where I lie mostly in my writing, but yeah, that's really the importance of storytelling and where I kind of think it's the most fascinating. So
Yeah, and it got me thinking. Allison writes her granddaddy owned 25 printing presses.
that's true. That's true. My
Atlanta.
grandfather did own printing presses all over Atlanta.
Yeah, and it made me think about my grandfather on my mother's side. I never knew the grandparents on my father's side, but I did on my mother's side. We would go over there for holidays, right? Christmas, Thanksgiving, things like that. And he was born in the late 1800s, passed away probably in the early 80s. But it's what's interesting is that you've got people like your grandparents, even like your parents, right? And every once in a while, you catch these tidbits of information that really there's a kernel there that, while their lives to them, like you were saying, may seem insignificant, they really have these interesting things to say. I remember my grandfather telling us, because he used to monitor the shores of Lake Erie during World War II as
Wow.
part of the Civil Air Defense, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
So that in and of itself is interesting.
Yeah.
But then he had stories of seeing UFOs over Lake Erie.
And that makes me smile because you're so into all of that stuff.
Right,
So
right,
I love
odds,
it.
right?
I love it.
But that story in and of itself, it seems rather insignificant. But I think we all have, interesting little things about our lives that really make us who we are, right?
Absolutely.
So I think I would agree. It's to influence, perhaps, to maybe have people think, make them feel a certain emotion, right? That's why we have horror fiction. That's why we have romance fiction, right? But I think another part of it as well is your story is just as interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, I think, I love fictional writing. Again, creative literature was what I really focused on in school. It evokes emotion. It brings up all these things that maybe we don't recognize in our own lives, makes us excited, makes us scared. Maybe you read a romance novel and you're like, oh my God, I can have that. Like, it's possible, So fictional writing brings up so much emotionally. And nonfiction writing, I feel, like someone telling their true story is a different level of bringing up emotions. But it has a way of, connecting us, but also helping us recognize things in our own lives that maybe we didn't see before, and when I'm working with people, they start writing about one thing and they think they're going to tell, this kind of simple story, and they have a theme in mind and the ending maybe in mind. And then they start writing and it brings up all of these things inside of them. And they're like, I never even realized this about myself before, or I didn't even think that my story was going to go this way. And here I am digging into, or it brings up memories that you had stored way in the back. And now they're like front and center and you can't ignore them. And so many times when I'm working with people, it does like transform as they get more vulnerable, as they get more honest with themselves. A story, a personal story is only as impactful as you are willing to be vulnerable. The vulnerability aspect of it is so important. And it's so scary to put things down on paper for the first time. I'm sure your grandfather, if he wanted to write about seeing aliens and UFOs, in the 1940s, people are going to be like, what? You belong in like an institution, the climate to be talking about that wasn't really, there. So to be honest and vulnerable about his experiences, it's the most powerful part of writing your story. And again, just recognizing things in your life that maybe you never even recognized before, and healing those things. I feel like when you're able to put things down on paper and really look at them, edit them, process them, you write something really crazy and maybe you cry, maybe you scream, maybe you're like shaking as you write it, and then you go to bed exhausted, you wake up and you read it and you're like, damn, that's good. So when you are able to just not care about who's going to read it and what they're going to think, and you're able to just own it and put it down on paper or in your YouTube video or wherever you're telling your story,
Right.
it is life changing, as Allison said in the chat. So yeah, that's really why I love the work that I do, coaching people to see that they do have power and that it's just within their own life experiences and what they took away from it, and looking at the themes that keep coming up in their life and understanding why they react a certain way to something, or why they, turn to something when they're stressed out or whatever it may be. Yeah, I really get a lot of joy from that.
So that's awesome. That's awesome, right? You've got somebody like me. I've dabbled in writing. You've got somebody like you, English major writing, right? Allison, she's a writer, right?
Yes.
As is Donna, Christine. All these folks have written, but there may be some folks that are tuning in that are like, well, you know what? I can't write. I just can't
I
do it.
hate when people say that they can't write. That's like the bane of my existence, is when I hear that phrase, because we all can. We all can. Yeah, I'll let you finish your question, but I hate that phrase because we are all capable of doing it.
Well, then that really is that question. Then is if we're all capable, and I don't argue that. I really don't. If anything, if you take it beyond the written word to a social media platform where you have now video. I mean, I'm sitting at my desk at home, broadcasting live, basically to everyone on the planet. 20, 30 years ago, well, actually less than that, right? The internet's only been around for about 20 years. Before that, we didn't have this capability. So we were kind of, limited to writing perhaps. But the hard part is always starting, right?
Yeah.
If I say I'm not a writer and yet my story, and then I feel my story isn't important. I think the first step, of course, is to recognize your own worth, right? And then recognize that your life is extremely unique.
Yes. Yes, it's like a fingerprint. No life is the same.
Exactly. Right.
And there are two types of writing. I like to, when people come to me and they're like, I've never written a thing before, I don't know what I'm doing. I always say there are two types of writers. There are intuitive writers and there are logical writers. So an intuitive writer is someone, obviously in the word, it comes naturally, it comes to them pretty easily. But even with an intuitive writer, they may not know how to logically put it all together. And then with a logical writer, they are more focused on, is my sentence structure okay? Is my, am I meeting word requirements? Am I hitting on all the plot points? And they're really like thinking about the structure of the whole thing. And really a combination of the two lies within all of us. But what I would say is that most people, when they say that they can't write, it's because they're comparing themselves to other pieces that they've written. Like, let's say Shakespeare, for instance. Let's just say in today's time, Shakespeare is like the John Grisham of our world. Like, people are reading his books, they're flying off the shelves, they're having to pull out their dictionaries because they don't know what half of the words say. Most of the world would feel like they don't know how to write if that was what was being compared to, right? And I was just working with someone recently who, she naturally writes in like poetry. And I was talking to her and I'm like, you are writing in stanzas and it's beautiful. It doesn't need to be in paragraph form necessarily, but like, do you even realize that you're doing this? And she was like, oh my gosh, I just remembered that from 14 to 16, I wrote like a poem every day. And I'm like, well, that's where this is coming from. And I've read full books that are written in poetry. I've read books where there's, 5 words on a page and then the next page there's 100 words. And, there's really no wrong way to go about it. As long as you know what you want your message to be and you have an idea that feels good to you, you will end up with something that is going to impact somebody. It doesn't have to be, the next great best-selling novel in Barnes and Noble for you to be a writer. It can be a blog that people love. It can be, like you said, it can be social media. I mean, a lot of writing is consumed now on social media. So it can really be in so many forms. It does not have to be perfectly structured, anything. It can be whatever. So.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I think, when you're, and it doesn't even have to be long. And that's another point as well. I mean, the internet notwithstanding with blogs and stuff, I think there for a while, it became a very popular thing and it kind of almost got a little oversaturated a little bit.
Yes.
So I'm not really sure if they're as popular as they were. However, years ago, I would write articles for magazines. Now there are still some magazines that go to print. I mean, you could walk into Barnes and Noble again, step into their magazine section, and there's magazines on every subject, right? From UFOs to, home and garden to,
Yeah,
you
golf,
name it.
cars, anything.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Nothing more interesting than picking up a golf magazine and going,
Yeah,
oh,
no, that's the first thing I am drawn
that's
to.
exciting. Yeah. And as Allison notes, I read an 89-page book yesterday and it was fabulous. So the point I'm making, I think, is that, if because stories are so important and everybody has a story, and you can be very creative with that. Your example of seeing 5 words on one page and 100 on the next, that is extremely common. I mean, not that particular maybe, but that idea that the book itself is a piece of art.
Right.
So if that's fact, which I believe it is, then you could be creative with that. So really the challenge would be for those folks that are thinking about doing something. While it would be nice to write out your entire history, right? Because that's kind of neat, right? Because someday someone might want to read that. It doesn't have to be long.
No, it does
Right.
not. And I would recommend it not being, if it's your first swing at like, okay, I'm gonna do this writing thing and really give it a go. I would recommend that you limit yourself, not in creativity, but in length, because it is very overwhelming to have to fill up, 200 pages if you feel like that's what you have to do. And, John and I, we were talking about this, but you don't have to do a list of things to be a writer. If you're sitting down and you're writing and it is your passion, or you feel like I'm really getting something out of this, even if it's just for yourself and not for anyone else to read, then you are a writer. You don't have to be published by a traditional publishing house. You don't have to, again, be a bestseller. You can do it without all of the accolades and you are still that thing. So for someone that's going to get started as a brand new writer, I would say, pick one event in your life that really stands out to you, that you think, yeah, I want to tell people about this. And, give yourself like 5,000 words. It's about 10 pages, and try to sprinkle in different writing, aspects. Like try to do a scene with dialogue, try to do a scene with some inner dialogue where it's basically all of the font is italicized. That's how you know you're talking to yourself. And try to bring in, 1 or 2 people maybe to your story. Don't overwhelm yourself with like plotting out the whole family tree or whatever it is that you're doing. So I would start there. And if you feel good about it, I would highly recommend peer editing. Find someone you trust to read it and give you some honest feedback. That is one of the hardest parts about writing, is having people come to you and say, this doesn't make sense, or I'm confused here, because you are being so vulnerable when you're writing that it feels like a personal attack sometimes. And I'm so desensitized to it, because for 4 years in school, that's all I did was just get my writing, not eviscerated, maybe sometimes, but definitely, critiqued to a point that you just become used to it, So I would say, don't take it personally. Writing is subjective. What feels good and makes sense to you might not make sense to your audience, and that's okay. And yeah, just start small. And again, not small-minded or with creativity, but just short. It'll help you not feel so pressured.
Yeah, when I wrote this is my #1 bestseller. I think I sold 0 copies on it, but that wasn't the intent for this, right? So I had that idea, and I kind of took that process of breaking down the interesting stories that I had into small segments. So I would maybe write 3 or 4 pages on a particular subject. The next time I would think of some other interesting thing and I would write 3 or 4 pages on that. And then over time, and this, believe it or not, took me almost 5 years to put this silly thing into print, because I would write on it and put it aside. Sometimes you're just not in the mood to write. And I think that's okay too, because with any art form, you want to be in that flow. But what I did with this, and this is really my autobiography, is I had to have a cutoff point.
Right.
Because if you are going to write about yourself, and I think you basically said that, is, if you don't have that cutoff point, things become too overwhelming. You don't know where to start. You don't know where to end. You don't know what to put in there. So taking that approach, I think, is also very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, even with the most famous people who have autobiographies, it doesn't go over their entire life. That would be impossible unless you made a movie out of it or something. And even then, you're going to cut out bits and pieces, and because writing is so personal and vulnerable, it's hard. It's hard to make those cuts and say, well, maybe I don't need to include that, or maybe I can kind of creatively tweak this to make a little bit more sense and more cohesive, with what I'm trying to say. So it can be scary to evaluate, and you feel like you're kind of putting your own life under a microscope sometimes. But the most important thing, I think, when you're trying to choose what to write about is the theme. Try to hone in on what you want your theme and your message to be, and then go from there. So yeah, that's where I would say start. If you are even thinking about it, please just start, and you will find that it's not as difficult once you just do the thing.
Right. And you were the editor of Behind the Power, You're Not Crazy, You Are Powerful, which
Yes.
hit the Amazon bestseller in multiple categories last year. And you were responsible for that entire book, the editing on that?
I was, and the only part I didn't do was the formatting, because formatting is boring to me. But I edited the entire thing, yes, and also the spiritual journey, Allison's book, I edited that as well. So yes, I
And
was
you
very
and
honored to
you
do both of those.
yeah, and you basically had to work with 13 different people for that?
Yes, 13 different writers.
Yeah. And how did that go? From an editing
Um,
perspective, I'm just interested.
it took some getting used to. I come from a teaching background. I have a family full of teachers on my dad's side, and I wanted to teach for the longest time. And it comes a little naturally, but it also is a challenge. I'm also working with people that are older than me, that have their own style, have their own ideas, and not like I ever felt like I was butting heads with anybody, but there is kind of that give and take of, okay, we'll go your direction here for a little bit, and then I'm going to pull you back, and we're going to go my direction for a little bit. So just trying to make them feel as supported. I'm not judgmental. I've seen so much in my own life that I literally cannot judge anybody else. And even if my life was very, very boring and nothing had happened to me, I still wouldn't judge anybody. But just from my own experiences, it takes a lot to shock me and to make me be like, oh my God, unless you're like, a racist asshole or something, then I'm not going to work with you. But, I just gave myself a lot of grace because it was my first time working on a project like that. So I really tried not to be too hard on myself. Deadlines were my Bible, and even more so this year. But really, I was so honored, like truly honored, to work with each and every one of you. Obviously, you were in that group, for those that might not know that. But it was just so beautiful seeing first drafts versus last drafts. That was like my favorite part, was going back and looking at, the raw, kind of like rough, not really well put together version of this thing. You all had this beautiful idea that just needed fine tuning, and again, so many people's stories. I'm pretty sure the entire group, all of the stories turned into not something completely different and away from the idea that you had originally, but just brought out so much in all of you in that process that, yeah, it was truly a beautiful journey to watch. I get really emotional when I think about it. And to have that be my first experience editing, and to have that trust that all of you gave me, was, again, like one of the deepest honors. So yeah, I'm doing it again this year. There are 10 writers this year and not 13. So it's a little bit more manageable, but it's still challenging. It's a lot of balancing. Being really familiar with different writing styles is super important. I don't want to take away your voice in any, sense. I don't want you to feel like I'm putting words in your mouth. So I don't do a whole lot of ghostwriting. I try to give the author as much power as possible while still guiding and making sure that we're not getting too off message, and that, we're not skirting around what really needs to be said, because a lot of people have the tendency to hide in their writing. They don't really want to put it down on paper because it's scary, it's personal, and just having them gain that trust with me over, the first session versus like our last session together is so different. Because the first session, they're kind of like, what are you going to tell me? Are you going to like tear my story apart? And then they see that I am truly just there to guide and support, and just make sure that you make the most impactful message that you can. So yeah, it's an amazing job. I'm truly so happy with the work that I'm doing now. So
yeah. So is that how you would, is that how, because I'm not a book editor, but is that basically the core tenets of being a book editor, to allow the people's story to come through? So it's just a matter of guiding them? right? Not
Yeah,
so much.
I mean, I would say more creative coaching is that way. Really, honestly, a traditional editor is not going to do any of that for you. They're just going to edit what you turn in, edit your grammar, edit your sentence structure, make sure that you're not, over the word requirement if there is one or whatever. So an editor truly doesn't really care how safe you feel. They just want their deadlines met and they want
Right.
stuff to edit. And that part is so important. It truly is. But if you're in a process like, the people I work with, you do need that coach to kind of say like, okay, talk to me about what's naturally coming to you, even if it's not down on paper yet. An editor won't do that. They need to see it written out. And, talk to me about how you want your reader to feel, how you want to feel when the product is done. Also, what are you trying to use this writing for in different capacities? Like, are you trying to use this to get on, podcasts? Are you trying to write for other books? So I get a clear vision of like what their end goal is. And then we kind of go from there. So, but yeah, a lot of it is just letting their natural voice come through, even if it's not on paper yet. So that's the most important part, I think.
Yeah. And Christine made a really good statement here. You made the process safe for me, she writes, but I would argue that was the case for everybody. I think.
Well, that makes me so happy to hear.
Yeah. I mean, everybody walked away, I think, very, very proud of, I know I did, proud of what I accomplished, but let's put it this way. The support that you provided me during that process really helped turn, well, that's not the word. I don't want to use a bad word for that. It really turned my first draft into something that really I thought read very, very well. Could I have done it on my own? Probably not.
Well, you probably could have because you're a very strong writer, but I truly loved working with you. And yeah, your story, we did bring up a lot of stuff that you weren't even expecting. So that was really cool to watch. Right. So, and thank you, Christine. I love you.
And then Allison writes, she also has intuition, which I agree with. That is off the chart.
I'm tapping into it more. Yeah, I was in a job for a long time where my intuition was not needed whatsoever. So I feel like I was really disconnected from it for too long, honestly. But writing has always been a really natural thing for me. I don't really write pieces that I put out. It's more just for myself. But when I do write, and I have thought about doing fiction and like an actual published piece, but it is just like I always tell my clients, I have a train station in my brain and the train just comes into the station. And if it's not coming to the station, then I'm not where I need to be with my writing. Because truly it gets very busy up there if I'm really in the flow of it. So I appreciate that people can see that.
So Donna says she agrees with Christine and I, and Christine writes, of course, you're welcome. Love you.
Well, thank you, Donna. Also, another powerful writer in the chat is Donna Walker. She has a very interesting life story, and she is one of the people that I have had to kind of pull to say, like, this is important. So this year she's being so vulnerable and so honest and really, diving into memories that I know that she has a hard time diving into, but her chapter is just beautiful. So that just proves to you and whoever's watching that really, as scary as it may be, it is the most powerful part of writing. When you're scared, you're writing something good.
Yeah, that's true. So I got to ask this question, though. I mean, we're almost up to 30 minutes, which I cannot believe that this time flew that quick.
I know, it flew by.
Yeah, the question is, you edited Behind the Power last year, the book. You're going to be doing it again this year. When are we going to see your chapter?
Oh, man. My podcast, the Narcissism Podcast, was kind of a way for me to tell a little bit of my story, although I stopped recording because it was getting very emotional and it was all about me, and I want to bring other people in to kind of spice up the conversation. So I haven't recorded in a long time. I have thought about diving back into my own writing. I'm very, very busy right now with editing the book, so I can't really put my attention where I want, but I listen to a lot of true crime. I also listen to a lot of like MLM culty, well, I really shouldn't say MLM stuff, but just culty stuff. I'm really interested in like groupthink and like what happens when a group gets together and the impact of it. So I have a little story brewing in my brain, and I have for about 2 years now. It's kind of like creepy suburb, like Stepford Wives kind of vibe. It's up there. I'm just trying to figure out, do I want to do like a murder mystery, or is it going to be like more of a cult thing where they're all going to like have to break out and like get themselves into, I don't know. It's brewing. The more stuff I listen to and the more I hear about, all of the things happening in the world, groups or not, I'm like, I need to make this into something because it enrages me, and I need to get the energy out somewhere where I'm not just screaming about it in my head. So yeah, it's brewing, but I'm going to give myself some time. I really want to dive into the coaching part of writing for a bit and keep guiding people, and I'm really excited for what 2024 is going to bring. I think it's going to be really good. So
I think it's going to be amazing. I think you're amazing.
Thank you. I think you're amazing too. And thank you again for having me. I would love to come back and do this again.
You're very welcome. How would people get a hold of you if they were interested in maybe some creative coaching or
yeah, so my website is my first and last name .me. So lauralindsey.me. You can also find me on Instagram. It's my first and my middle name. So Laura Marguerite. Facebook is also Laura Marguerite. But yeah, my website's there. You can email me and have a conversation if you're interested.
Yeah, I definitely encourage it. Again, Laura did an exceptional job last year. She's doing a great job this year. And the whole piece about using your intuition, about really helping us get our stories out there, I think is a very unique thing that you offer people. And if there's anybody out there thinking about stories, just reach out to Laura. I would be 99.99% sure she could make some time for you. There's always that 0.01% she might be.
Yeah, always that little chance. But maybe I'll be too busy writing my own book by the time you reach out to me. But no, I would love that. I'd be honored. So
great. Well, again, thank you very much for being on with me tonight. I can't believe the half an hour went this fast. And thanks to everybody who watched and who's going to watch the replay. Next week, I'm going to have on Beth Nagel Griffin. Yay. So for those that don't know, I'm going now to move to a weekly schedule, and we'll cross my fingers that they continue to go as well as this conversation.
Well, thank you again for having me. And yeah, that did fly by. I cannot believe it's 5:30. And yeah, maybe I'll come back on sometime if you'll have me.
I would love that. Thank you. All right, folks, you guys have a great evening, and I'll see you next week. This is John Cole, artist. Thank you so very much for joining me on the Art Talk podcast, where it's my goal to bring artists together to talk about their craft. If you'd like to join me for a conversation, please reach out via email at johncoleartist@gmail.com or by visiting my website at johnrobertcole.com. So until next time, keep crafting, painting, and inspiring others with your creativity. You make more of an impact than you know.